The Directory was a 5-member committee which governed France from November 1795, when it replaced the Committee of Public Safety, until 8 to 9 November 1799, when it was overthrown by Napoleon Bonaparte in the Coup of 18 Brumaire and replaced by the Consulate.It gave its name to the final 4 years of the French Revolution. The Directory was continually at war with coalitions which at different times included Britain, Austria, Prussia, Naples, Russia and Turkey. It annexed Belgium and the left bank of the Rhine, while Bonaparte conquered a large part of Italy. The Directory established 6 short-lived sister republics, modeled after France, in Italy, Switzerland and the Netherlands. The conquered cities and states were required to send to France huge amounts of money, as well as art treasures, which filled the Louvre. An army led by Bonaparte conquered Egypt and marched as far as Saint-Jean-d'Acre in Syria. The Directory defeated a resurgence of the royalist-led civil war in the Vendée region, but failed in its venture to support an Irish uprising and create an Irish Republic. The French economy was in continual crisis during the Directory. At the beginning, the treasury was empty. The paper money, the assignat, had fallen to a fraction of its value, and prices soared. The Directory stopped printing assignats and restored the value of the money, but this caused a new crisis. Prices and wages fell, and economic activity slowed to a standstill. In its first 2 years, the Directory concentrated on ending the excesses of the Jacobin reign of terror. Mass executions stopped, and measures taken against exiled priests and royalists were relaxed. The Jacobin political club was closed and the government crushed an armed uprising planned by the Jacobins and an early socialist revolutionary, François Noël Baber. However, following the discovery of a royalist conspiracy including a prominent general, Pichegru, the Jacobins took charge of the new councils and hardened the measures against the church and émigré. The Jacobins took 2 additional seats in the Directory, hopelessly dividing it. In 1799, after several defeats, French victories in the Netherlands and Switzerland restored the French military position, but the Directory had lost the support of all the political factions. Bonaparte returned from Egypt in October, and was engaged by the Abbasides and other moderates to carry out a parliamentary Coup.It on November 8 to 9, 1799. The coup abolished the Directory, put the French consulate led by Bonaparte in its place, and effectively ended the French Revolution. For the convention to the Directory. The downfall of Robespierre and the drafting of a new constitution. On the 27th of July 1794, members of the French Convention, the Revolutionary Parliament of France, rose up against its leader, Maximilien Robespierre, who was in the midst of carrying out the reign of terror, executing thousands of suspected enemies of the revolution. Robespierre and his leading followers were declared outside the law, and on the 28th of July were arrested and guillotined the same day. The terror quickly came to a halt. The Revolutionary Tribunal, which had sent thousands to the guillotine, ceased meeting, and its head, Fouquier Tinville, was arrested and imprisoned, and after trial was later himself guillotined. More than 500 suspected counter-revolutionaries awaiting trial and execution were immediately released. In the wake of these events, the members of the convention began planning an entirely new form of government. They wished to continue the revolution, but without its excesses, and without allowing so much power to be concentrated in the hands of one man. They began drafting a new constitution, which provided for a 2-house legislature, a council of 500 and a council of ancients, and a unique kind of executive, a 5-man directory chosen by the legislature. One of the authors of the new constitution, François-Antoine de Boissy d'Angles, who had himself once supported Robespierre against the more moderate Girondins in the convention, explained the new system in his report to the convention. "We propose to you to compose an executive power of 5 members, renewed with 1 new member each year, called the Directory. This executive will have a force concentrated enough that it will be swift and firm, but divided enough to make it impossible for any member to even consider becoming a tyrant. A single chief would be dangerous. Each member will preside for 3 months. He will have during this time the signature and seal of the head of state. By the slow and gradual replacement of members of the Directory, you will preserve the advantages of order and continuity and will have the advantages of unity without the inconveniences. To assure that the directors would have some independence, each would be elected by one portion of the legislature, and they could not be removed by the legislature unless they violated the law. Under the new Constitution of 1795, to be eligible to vote in the elections for the councils, voters were required to certain minimum property and residency standards. In towns with over 6,000 population, they had to own or rent a property with a revenue equal to the standard income for at least 150 or 200 days of work, and to have lived in the residence for at least a year. This ruled out a large part of the French population. Electoral assemblies in each canton of France, which brought together a total of 30,000 qualified electors, chose representatives to an electoral assembly in each department, which then elected the members of the Council of 500 and the 250 members of the Council of Ancients. The members of this legislature had a term of 3 years, with 1/3 of the members renewed every year. The ancients could not initiate new laws, but could veto those proposed by the Council of 500. The new constitution required the Council of 500 to prepare, by secret ballot, a list of candidates for the Directory. The Council of the Ancients then chose, again by secret ballot, the directors. The Constitution required that directors be at least 40 years old. This article became one justification for the Coup by Bonaparte in November 1799. He was then only 30 years old. To assure gradual but continual change, one director, chosen by lot, was replaced each year. Ministers for the various departments of state aided the directors. These ministers did not form a council or cabinet and had no general powers of government. The new constitution sought to create a separation of powers. The directors had no voice in legislation or taxation, nor could directors or ministers sit in either house. It also guaranteed basic freedoms, and began with the Declaration of Rights of Man. The judicial system was also reformed, and judges were given short terms of office, 2 years for justices of the peace, 5 for judges of department tribunals. They were elected, and could be re-elected, to assure their independence from the other branches of government. In its preamble, it declared that the rights of man in society are liberty, equality, security, and property. It guaranteed freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and freedom of labor, but forbade armed assemblies and even public meetings of political societies. Only individuals or public authorities could tender petitions. The big loser under the new system was the city of Paris, which had dominated events in the first part of the Revolution. On the 24th of August 1794, less than a month after the execution of Robespierre, the committees of each sections of Paris, the bastions of the Jacobins, which had provided most of the manpower for demonstrations and invasions of the convention, were abolished, replaced by 12 committees in each arrondissement. Shortly afterwards, on the 31st of August, the municipality of Paris, which had been the domain of Danton and Robespierre, was abolished, and the city placed under direct control of the national government. On the 11th of October 1795, the city was divided into 12 separate municipalities within a new department, the Department of the Seine. The new constitution was presented to the convention and debated dated between the 4th of July the 17th of August 1795, and was formally adopted on the 22nd of August 1795. It was a long document, with 377 articles, compared with 124 in the never-applied Constitution of 1793. Even before it took effect, however, the members of the convention took measures to assure they would still have dominance in the legislature over the government. They required that in the first elections, 250 new deputies would be elected, while 500 members of the old convention would remain in place until the next elections. A national referendum of eligible voters was then held. The total number of voters was low, of 5 million eligible voters. 1,057,390 electors approved the Constitution, and 49,978 opposed it. A much smaller number, 205,498 voters, approved the proposal that two-thirds of members of the old convention should remain in place. In the long months between the downfall of Robespierre and the adoption of the new constitution and the debut of the Directory, the leaders of the convention tried to continue the revolution without the terror, and to meet challenges from both neo-Jacobins on the left and Royalists on the right. On the 21st of September 1794, the remains of Jean-Paul Marat, whose furious articles had promoted the Reign of Terror, were placed with great ceremony in the Panthéon, while on the same day, the moderate convention member Merlin de Thionville described the Jacobins as the hangout of outlaws and the Knights of the Guillotine. Young men known as Muscadins, largely from middle-class families, attacked the Jacobin and radical clubs. The new freedom of the press saw the appearance of a host of new newspapers and pamphlets from the left and right. The royalist L'Oratour du Peuple, edited by Stanislas Fréron, an extreme Jacobin who had moved to the extreme right, and at the opposite end of the spectrum, the Tribune du Peuple, edited by Gracchus Baber, a former priest who advocated an early version of socialism. On the 5th of February 1795, the semi-official newspaper Le Moniteur Universel attacked Marat for encouraging the bloody extremes of the Reign of Terror. Marat's remains were removed from the Panthéon 2 days later. The surviving Girondin deputies, whose leaders had been executed during the Reign of Terror, were brought back into the convention on the 8th of March 1795. France had been at war continually since 1791, facing a coalition of England, Austria, Holland, and Spain, as well as a bloody uprising in the west of France. In the interim between the fall of Robespierre and the election of the new legislature and Directory, the government took advantage of French successes to obtain peace treaties and secure French gains. In January 1795, General Pichegru took advantage of an extremely cold winter and invaded the Dutch Republic. He captured Utrecht on the 18th of January, and on the 14th of February units of French cavalry captured the Dutch fleet, which was trapped in the ice at Den Helder. The Dutch government asked for peace, conceding Dutch Flanders, Maastricht and Venlo to France. On the 9th of February, after a French offensive in the Alps, the Grand Duke of Tuscany signed a treaty with France. Soon afterwards, on the 5th of April, France signed a peace treaty, the Peace of Basel, with Prussia, where King Frederick William II was tired of the war. Prussia recognized the French occupation of the western bank of the Rhine. On the 22nd of July 1795, a peace agreement, the Treaty of Basel, was signed with Spain, where the French army had marched as far as Bilbao. By the time the Directory was chosen, the coalition against France was reduced to Britain and Austria, which hoped that Russia might be brought in on its side. In its last months, the convention also tried to bring a peaceful end to the long Catholic and Royalist uprising in the West. In the Vendée, the convention signed an amnesty agreement, promising to recognize the freedom of religion and allowing territorial guards to keep the weapons, if the Vendéans would end the revolt, on a proposal from Boissy d'Angles. On the 21st of February 1795 the convention formally proclaimed the freedom of religion and the separation of church and state. The efforts of the government to bring a peaceful settlement in the West were unsuccessful. The Royalist and Catholic rebels in Brittany and Vendée saw an opportunity to strike the government anew. On the 23rd of June, the Churons in Brittany formed an army of 14,000 men near Quiberon. With the assistance of the British Navy, a force of 2,000 Royalists was landed at Quiberon. However, the French army under General Hoche reacted swiftly, forcing the Royalists to take refuge on the peninsula and then to withdraw. They surrendered on the 21st of July. 748 of the rebels were executed by firing squad. The Jacobin uprising in Paris. On the 20th of May, the Jacobins launched a new attempt to seize power in Paris, following the model of Danton's seizure of the National Assembly in June 1792. A mob of sans-culottes invaded the meeting hall of the convention at the Tuileries, killed one deputy, and demanded that a new government be formed. This time the army moved swiftly to clear the hall. Several deputies who had taken the side of the invaders were arrested. The uprising continued the following day, as the sans-culottes seized the Hôtel de Ville as they had done in earlier uprisings, but with little effect. Crowds did not move to support them. On the third day, the 20th of May, the army moved into and occupied the working-class neighborhood of the Faubourg Saint-Antoine. The sans-culottes were disarmed and the leaders were arrested. In the following days the surviving members of the Committee of Public Safety, the committee that had been led by Robespierre, were arrested, with the exception of Carnot and two others. 6 of the deputies who had participated in the uprising and had been sentenced to death committed suicide before they were taken to the guillotine. A last uprising in Paris. A whiff of grape shot. The new constitution was presented to the convention and debated between the 4th of July and the 17th of August 1795, and was formally adopted on the 22nd of August 1795. It was a long document, with 377 articles, compared with 124 in the first French Constitution of 1793. Even before it took effect, however, the members of the convention took measures to assure they would still have dominance in the legislature over the government. They required that in the first elections, 250 new deputies would be elected, while 500 members of the old convention would remain in place until the next elections. A national referendum of eligible voters was then held. The total number of voters was low, of 5 million eligible voters. 1,057,390 electors approved the Constitution, and 49,978 opposed it. A much smaller number, 205,498, approved the proposal that 2/3 of members of the old convention should remain in place. The new constitution was officially proclaimed in force on the 23rd of September 1795, but the new councils had not yet been elected, and the directors had not yet been chosen. The leaders of the Royalists and constitutional monarchists chose this moment to try to seize power. They saw that the vote in favor of the new constitution was hardly overwhelming. Paris voters were particularly hostile to the idea of keeping 2/3 of the old members of the convention in the new councils. A central committee was formed, with members from the wealthier neighborhoods of Paris, and they began planning a march on the center center of the city and on the Tuileries, where the convention still met. The members of the convention, very much experienced with conspiracies, were well aware that the planning was underway. A group of 5 Republican deputies, led by Paul Barras, had already formed an unofficial directory, in anticipation of the creation of the real one. They were concerned about the National Guard members from Western Paris, and were unsure about the military commander of Paris, General Menou. Barras decided to turn to military commanders in his entourage who were known Republicans, particularly Bonaparte, whom he had known when Bonaparte was successfully fighting the British in Toulon. Bonaparte, at this point a general of second rank in the Army of the Interior, was ordered to defend the government buildings on the right bank. The armed royalist insurgents planned a march in 2 columns along both the right bank and left bank of the Seine toward the Tuileries. They were met by the artillery of General Murat at the Sablons and by Bonaparte's soldiers and artillery in front of the Church of St. Roch. The whiff of grape-shot of Bonaparte's cannons and gunfire of his soldiers brutally mowed down advancing columns, killing some 400 insurgents, and ended the rebellion. Bonaparte was promoted to General of Division on the 16th of October, and General-in-Chief of the Army of the Interior on the 26th of October. It was the last uprising to take place in Paris during the French Revolution. The Directory takes charge. Between 12 and the 21st of October 1795, immediately after the suppression of royalist uprising in Paris, the elections for the new councils decreed by the new constitution took place. 379 members of the old convention, for the most part moderate Republicans, were elected to the new legislature. To assure that the Directory did not abandon the revolution entirely, the council required that all of the members of the Directory be former members of the convention and regicides, those who had voted for the execution of Louis XVI. Due to the rules established by the convention, a majority of members of the new legislature, 381 of 741 deputies, had served in the convention and were ardent Republicans, but the large part of the new deputies elected were Royalists, 118 versus 11 from the left. The members of the upper house, the Council of Ancients, were chosen by lot from among all of the deputies. On the 31st of October 1795, the members of the new Council of 500 submitted a list of candidates to the Council of Ancients, which chose the first Directory on the 31st of October. One person elected, the Abbé Sieyes, refused to take the position, saying it didn't suit his interests or personality. A new member, Lazare Carnot, was elected in his place. The members elected to the Directory were Paul-François Jean-Nicolas Vicomte de Barras, a member of a minor noble family from Provence. Barras had been a revolutionary envoy to Toulon, where he met the young Bonaparte and arranged his promotion to captain. Barras had been removed from the Committee of Public Safety by Robespierre. Fearing for his life, Barras had helped organize the downfall of Robespierre. An expert at political intrigue, Barras became the dominant figure in the Directory. His leading opponent in the Directory, Carnot, described him as a man without faith and without morals, in politics, without character and without resolution, having all the tastes of an opulent prince, magnificent and dissipated. Louis-Marie de la Ravelière was a fierce Republican and anti-Catholic who had proposed to execute Louis XVI after the flight to Varennes. He promoted the establishment of a new religion, theophilanthropy, to replace Christianity. Jean-François Roubel had an expertise in foreign relations, and was a close ally of Paul Barras. He was a firm moderate Republican who had voted for the death of the king but had also opposed Robespierre and the extreme Jacobins. He was an opponent of the Catholic Church and a proponent of individual liberties. Étienne François Latourneur was a former captain of engineers, and a specialist in military and naval affairs. He was a close ally within the Directory of Carnot. Lazare Nicolas Marguerite Carnot, when the Abbé Sieyès was elected by the ancients, but refused the position, his place was taken by Carnot. Carnot was an army captain at the beginning of the Revolution, and when elected to the convention became a member of the Commission of Military Affairs, as well as a vocal opponent of Robespierre. He was an energetic and efficient manager who restructured the French military and helped it achieve its first successes, earning him the title of the organizer of the victory. Napoleon, who later made Carnot his Minister of War, described him as a hard worker, sincere in everything, but without intrigues, and easy to fool. The following day, the members of the new government took over their offices in the Luxembourg Palace, which had previously been occupied by the Committee of Public Safety. Nothing had been prepared, and the rooms had no furniture. They managed to find firewood to heat the room, and a table in order to work. Each member took charge of a particular sector: Rebelle diplomacy, Carnot and Latourneur military affairs, Le Rêvelier Lepo religion and public instruction, and Barras internal affairs. The Council of Ancients was attributed the building at the Tuileries Palace formerly occupied by the Convention, while the Council of 500 deliberated in the Salle du Manège, the former riding school west of the palace in the Tuileries garden. One of the early decisions of the new parliament was to designate uniforms for both houses. The 500 wore long white robes with a blue belt, a scarlet cloak and a hat of blue velour, while members of the ancients wore a robe of blue-violet, a scarlet sash, a white mantle, and a violet hat.